Hello and welcome to episode 81 of The Thing About Golf, Golf Australia magazine's continuing search for an answer to that question. What is it about this game that gets people so hooked? I'm Rod Morrie, and joining me on the line from his home base in Scotland is John Huggan, who's here to tell us about this week's guest. Huggy, welcome. We're heading to the land of television this week. Who have you been chatting with?
I bumped into Rich Lerner of the Golf Channel while I was in Thailand at the Asia Pacific Championship recently. He's always been kind of intriguing to me, Rich. I mean, he spends most of his time asking questions of other people on the Golf Channel, but whenever he's had the chance to actually say what he thinks, I've always thought, oh, that's quite an interesting point of view. So I thought, well, let's find out what he really thinks about things, which is exactly what we did.
Well, I was intrigued to see him bob up on your list for that very reason. You've been, well, how could we put it, critical of TV commentators more than once in the past. Did you come away from this conversation with him with a better understanding of what that job is and why sometimes it can seem like we sit and watch at home and go, oh, you shouldn't do that?
Well, he's a real commentator. He's not just he's not the guy on the voice that you hear on the television screen that tells you what you've just seen. That's not his thing. He does actually think about things, issues in golf and all the rest of it, and he comments in the proper way. And he's written some nice things. He's a nice writer, and he's written some things that's actually have actually made me think about things slightly differently. Again, another reason to get him to sit down and talk. And he's an interesting background as well. I mean, he came from there was things he told me that I'd never heard before. I think he was a kind of travel agent, family travel agent business they had back in the day in New Jersey, where he's from, and gravitated into golf eventually. So he's just an interesting guy with interesting things to say, which is exactly what we want on this podcast. It
is indeed. And TV commentary, Huggy, I'm thinking about Rich Lerner, and I'd recognise his voice immediately. I would recognise his face, but he's never the show, is he? Jim Nantz is sometimes the show at the Masters. You know, he's a big personality. Lerner is the anonymous guider of what's going on, and that's really what that job should be about.
Yeah, and the fact that he does it so well is that you don't really notice that he's doing it.
Yeah.
And that's the key. He's very good at what he does.
Indeed. Is this a more interesting interview than I thought it was going to be? I haven't listened to the whole thing yet.
It is, yeah. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised that, especially the second half, where the first half's a bit kind of autobiographical, which is fun in itself, but we get stuck into a few things in the second half, which is, for most people, I would think the most interesting aspect of it.
That is what I'm looking forward to. That is also what the listeners should be looking forward to, and it's been great of you to come along today and give us a bit of a heads up about it. Thanks, Huggy.
My pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, Rich Lerner.
Okay, welcome again to the Thing About Golf podcast. I'm joined this time round by a famous face and voice, certainly in America and probably around the world on the Golf Channel. Rich Lerner, long-time Golf Channel host. The first question on these things is always the same. What was or is the thing about golf for you?
Huggy, good to be on your show. Thanks for having me. Thing about golf for me is initially, I don't know that I had a choice. I was sort of born into it. My father, rest in peace, Les Lerner, owned a driving range, miniature golf or putt-putt, and a fully lighted par 3 in Allentown, Pennsylvania, about an hour north of Philadelphia. So started in the late 1950s, had it in the family until the early 90s. So by the time I was of age, teenager and ready to earn a couple of bucks on the side, I was working at the driving range.
Were you the gopher, the guy who picked up the balls, that stuff?
That was the plum job. If you could get it,
right.
Was to drive the tractor covered in the chicken wire fence.
Yeah.
And I promise you, if you were going across the range at about the 100-yard mark and it was jam-packed, all 30 stalls were taken, all 30 hitters turned their eye to you.
Yeah.
And when they hit you, when the ball clanged off of the tractor, it was as if they had made an ace at the 12th at Augusta National.
Yeah.
They went bananas. But it was a great place to grow up. My 3 brothers and I ran it for my dad for a long time. All of our friends worked there. all-time summer job. I actually worked there until, pretty much my final year of college. I was in and out of Dorneyville Golf Center. So that was the thing about golf for me, was it was out my back door, rode my bike from the house to the driving range, and 1,000 stories from the driving range.
The obvious question is, you must have come across an incredible cast of characters at a place like that. I mean, can you give us a taste of some of them?
Is this a PG or R-rated program?
Go for it. This is for Australia. Anything goes.
We had soda delivery man named Mountain. Mountain was 6'6", 340, dressed in sort of the green workers outfit. He filled our soda machine with Canada Dry,
right,
which was an A-Treat. A-Treat was the big local soda. So Mountain would come out, and we gave Mountain free golf balls, not just because he delivered the sodas, but because he had a trunk full of magazines that were of great interest.
Uh-huh.
They weren't golf magazines.
No,
they were of great interest to teenage boys in the late 1970s. And so it was a little quid pro quo. But on top of all of that, Mountain was an enormous long ball hitter. And so first, when Mountain would come out, he'd lean on the counter, and he would take us through all 18 holes of whatever his latest round of golf was. And so to this day, we use it as a verb. If one of our friends starts out, first hole I hit a drive, and with Mountain, because he was so long, it was always drive and a flip. What'd you hit? 520-yard par 5. What'd you hit, Mountain? Drive and a flip, drive and a flip. Every hole was drive and a flip. And so if you start telling me your round, Huggy, number one, hey, Huggy, how'd you play?
Nothing more boring than someone else's round of golf.
How'd you play? I'd like it. Not bad. Shot 77. That would be enough. But we know friends who will, number one, I got to hit it in the right rough, and from there, and you're in the 7th hole now. You're being mountained. It's a verb now. So, but Mountain could hit balls over the fence. Those were the days before heavy litigation and liability. I don't know what my father's coverage was.
In Britain, they call it health and safety.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the fence was, and again, this was persimmon woods, and these were woods that, they were just standard from some company that made range equipment. Might have been 220. So it wasn't a big clear. And the 5th and 6th greens of the pitch and putt were on the other side of the back of the driving range. People ducking balls. So Mount was our soda delivery guy. And by the way, occasionally on a busy night, you'd have little Jimmy, 7 years old, come to the front counter. And he would sheepishly say, I want to get a grape soda, but this came out. He was holding a Budweiser because they were, being chilled for the evening's.
At least he wasn't asking for the magazines.
Festivities. Again, it's young guys manning the shop from my dad, ages roughly 15 to 20. So Mountain was a great character. We had a security guy named Lou who was on loan from the local prison. He was on a work release.
Really?
Yeah. And so if things got a little out of control late at night, and occasionally they did, if you came to Dorneyville Golf Center on a Friday night, beautiful Friday night at 11 o'clock, and we stayed open sometimes till 1, cash register still humming. And you'd look up on the range, and if there were 10 guys at 11 o'clock at night, 8 of them were turned around aiming for the supermarket across the street. So we'd have to say, Lou was not very bright, but he was big. And Lou would look, if I was managing, he would say, Rich, you want me to go up there with a 9-iron and crack him over the skull? Now, Lou, easy. Just show yourself. We don't need it. Nothing physical. Just show yourself.
Just scare
and
them.
Point him to the 200-yard sign. So we had Lou, the all-time character that anybody associated with the golf center. There are a lot of guys who came through there and worked that are still friends of mine. We all talk about, remember, is the old pro Frank Stockey, And Frank was a driving range hustler, Depression era character, drinker, smoker, gambler, played the ponies, the lottery every day. If I had to open up, say 8 a.m, Frank was always there in a tan Caprice that he was always proud of. And he always had a new car like every 6 months, and he got it not from the local car dealer. He got it somewhere else for $150 or $200. He worked in a battery plant by night, and he hustled $5 lessons by day. And he was slick, kind of a good-looking, silver-haired guy. Smoked the unfiltered Pall Malls.
You should write a book about these
powder blue Zanza belts. Great tan. And so if I opened up at 8 a.m, Frank was always there. We were his life. He was a guy, you might have known men like this growing up in the UK. He lived in a hotel room. He lived at the hotel trailer on 15th and Hamilton in downtown Allentown. He had trouble through the years with women and with booze, and but
who hasn't, Rich?
he was beloved, and because he taught all the teenage boys out there lessons that no mother, father, teacher, priest, rabbi would ever touch about life. So Frank was always there at 8 a.m, and the first I'd open the golf center, lift the shutters, sweep up, and Frank would always say, "Come on, let's go across the street and get a cup of coffee and a couple of lottery tickets. We'd like to play the lottery." And I would say, "But Frank, I have to work." And he would yell at me. He said, "Let me explain something to you. Let me see your fingernails." And he always had an unfiltered Camel dangling, or Pall Mall, whatever. When we had a cigarette machine, we had the old cigarette machines that you pulled. I can remember we had Winstons, we had Cools, we had Vantages, whatever the cigarettes of the 70s and 80s were back when. And we had a pinball room and a hot dog stand. So Frank, he would get pissed when I'd say I have to work. And he would say, "Let me see your fingernails." And I'd show my fingernails. There was no dirt on them.
Yeah.
So if you didn't have dirt under your fingernails, he called it, "You're a non-worker." Let me explain something to you. What you do is not work. And then he'd always win that argument. All right, so I'd have to lock up the driving range again, the golf center, and we'd walk across the street, and we'd buy lottery tickets, get a cup of coffee, and come back, and then we'd sit and hash things out. And he had like a group of guys. None of us ever knew what these men did. They just came out and they sat and they bullshitted all day. And they were older guys. And, Frank, he hustled lessons, but he actually had a pretty good following in the area. He was the greatest teacher of beginners to this day that I've ever seen. He could take somebody who never played, and he had a way of getting them he would always pose them in the follow-through position, and he would step away, take a drag of a cigarette, and say, "Now get there." And people would say, "Well, what do you mean? What about the backswing?" "Get there." He used to bark stuff out. There's a funny story that I like to tell about Frank. So we're sitting around one day, like a half dozen picnic tables there, and Frank says, "One year I led the Reading Open, in case you're interested, shot 69 the opening round." Like bullshit. You just gave a lesson to Mrs. Worthington for $5. You're talking about you shot 69. You've been working in the battery plant all these years. Well, he's a little pissed. You shot. Well, who was in the tournament, Frank? How about Byron Nelson, Ben Hogan, and Sam Snead? By the way, Byron Nelson was an assistant pro at Reading Country Club, and they used to have a tour event called the Reading Open. Reading was a town in eastern PA. If you went, Allentown, you went sort of west across the state, you'd go, one industrial city after the next. Allentown, Reading, Lancaster, and keep going all the way out to Pittsburgh and Altoona and Erie. So, who was in the tournament, Frank? How about Byron Nelson, Ben Hogan, and Sam Snead? Well, he's got my attention now. Like, holy shit, you led a real tournament with Hogan, Nelson, and Snead.
Stand this story
So,
up.
Huggy, I was, a budding reporter at 15, 16 years of age. I knew the appropriate follow-up question to ask, which was, what'd you shoot the next round? Well, Frank could flick a cigarette further than Adam Vinatieri kicks a field goal in American football. I'm talking 47 yards end over end. Questions asked, cigarettes flicked, smoke comes just pouring through the nostrils. And the answer to the question, what'd you shoot the second round, was, went out that night, got drunk, upload, came back, shot 87 and missed the fucking cut. I apologize for my language. You asked for the real stuff.
No, that's good.
So, when Brandel on Live From has launched into a lengthy swing breakdown after I've asked him, Brandel, what went wrong today? For one of our contenders here, he went off the rails and missed the cut and struggled today. And when they cut away to me and I appear to be earnestly nodding in agreement with Brandel, just know that what I'm really thinking is bullshit. He went out last night, got drunk, and came back and shot and missed the cut. So anyway, Stocky was he was actually an important figure in my life in the early days. He used to follow me to junior tournaments. I was like his little protege. And, even when I was 19, 20, 21, and these were the, hardy party, late 70s, early 80s. And I was a little loose back then. And, Frank used to sit me down at the bar across the street from the driving range, the King George Inn, and he'd be 6, 7 Jack Daniels deep. You ever get around a guy like that who has regrets, and when they get deep into a bottle,
That's why people sing the blues.
They get serious, and he used to get in my face, and he saw that I was starting to party a little bit, and he'd lay into me. He'd say, Richard, you stay away from that crap. And
Did it work?
Not initially, but years later, his voice, when I got a little deep, his voice, was in my head. Frank passed away in the early 90s, and it was kind of sad. Though he was somewhat of a local legend, I don't think there were 10 people at his funeral. I was there. But if you ask any of the 30 guys who at one point or another worked at Dorneyville Golf Center in Allentown, PA, about Frank Stocky, every one of them has stories and remembers him vividly. He was a great storyteller. He was funny. He was blunt. He was foul-mouthed. And he was a truth teller in his own way. And Sorry, I
was just going to ask you, given the people that you deal with now in your role, it's maybe a wee bit of inverse snobbery here, but are those guys back in the day, are they the real golfers?
Yeah.
They play because they loved it.
Yeah,
is that too much of a cliche?
I don't know. He was from just a different era. He was, as I said, Depression era, and everything he had, was kind of a hustle. I remember playing money matches with him on my dad's pitch and putt. We had a guy who affectionately became known as the Pigeon, who wanted to play for money.
Right.
And, I didn't have 2 nickels to scratch together, but, Frank would coax me down. And those were my first money matches when I was 15, 16. I remember the Pigeon wrote me an $800 check and Frank an $800 check. And that bounced like a basketball.
I'll bet.
But I saved it. But Frank was the guy, his pre-shot, it was cigarette dangling. He would tilt his head, eyeball the shot. No practice swings. They didn't take practice swings. The cigarette smoke just kind of wafted up toward their eye. So the one, maybe the left eye was closed and they're eyeballing the shot. And then they would flick the cigarette to the side, step into the shot, left toe out.
This sounds like Lee Trevino.
Little bit of a waggle and go. And Frank's his big lesson, whatever was going wrong in your swing, the fix was you got to pronate the hands. See, you got to pronate the hands. Supination, pronate.
Yeah.
That was, it was a handsy era. It was a boozier era. He was a great character.
That sounds like a great way to start, but you've got to talk me through a little bit how you gravitated from there to where you are now. I mean, you've been with the Golf Channel now for 25 years, which I hate to tell you.
That's a long time. It was a long...
You must be doing something right.
There's a long winding road from Dorneyville Golf Center to the Golf Channel, but it's connected. There was a sort of a tie to Palmer. Palmer was from the other side of Pennsylvania, and he was ascendant as my dad's dream was being born. And my dad had some partners initially, and then one through the years named Murray Saltzman. My dad was a graduate of the Wharton School, the University of Pennsylvania, prestigious business school. He was, entrepreneurial through and through. He was from the era where you came out of a school and, when you went to work for your father. My grandfather was a Russian immigrant who became successful, had a department store in a cement town in Pennsylvania back, before malls came into existence, when every sort of industrial town had a department store on its main street. But my dad never really wanted to be in that business, and he knew it was a dying business, and it would, sort of fade away as the malls came into existence in the 70s. But he had much more of an entrepreneurial spirit. So he was, a basketball player who sort of got into golf like a lot of people post World War II. America was kind of ready to get on, enjoying its hard-won freedom. Leisure time was sort of new in the 1950s, and golf on the backs of the strong back of rugged guy from Western PA was starting to take off. And my dad thought, we get that guy to put his name on this new venture, we could really have something. We might have a string of Arnold Palmer golf centers across the country. There you go. The hell of an idea.
Yeah.
When Arnold, as we would come to learn, Huggy was a pretty good businessman, would you say?
Yes, indeed.
Right. So when my dad found out Arnold's asking price to lend his name to this venture, Dorneyville Golf Center was born, named for the little borough on the edge of the expanding city of Allentown. So years later, this story comes full circle. After I'd worked at Golf Channel for years, my wife and I had started a charity golf tournament, December Classic, and in the last, 8-9 years, it benefited the Winnie Palmer Hospital, neonatal intensive care unit, women and babies. And Arnold, after my father had passed, presented my family with a plaque in honor of my dad. That plaque hangs outside one of the neonatal intensive care rooms at the hospital. So my dad got his name in the hospital. We never did get Arnold's name on the driving range. So it's a nice bit of symmetry there. So how did I get to Golf Channel from Dorneyville? Well, I went to Temple University in Philadelphia. I always had the broadcast bug, just growing up in a family of 4 boys. We games morning, noon, and night. And I played and called the games while I was playing.
Where were you in the order?
I was number 3, 2 older.
Okay.
Oldest was a very good athlete. He set the tone. He's one of the better baseball players in the area, and started on the big high school basketball team. So it was kind of a fun, rough and tumble house. Backyard basketball games. We were the hub for the whole neighborhood. There were tackle football games. There were, the wiffle ball games, you name it. I was, I used to announce while we played, and after college at Temple University, I came back to Allentown, PA, and I started working at Channel 69, WFMZ TV. Don't laugh, Huggy. I begged the owners. 69. I begged the owners of the station. I said, check with the FCC. Channel 70 is available.
Yeah.
Channel 68 is available. Yeah. Don't make me come on TV every night with the sports report and say, welcome to 69 Sports.
Yeah.
But Be that as it may.
Let's not
Huggy.
take that any further.
Be that as it may. What are you talking about? Be that as it may. Am I going to get in trouble? I've already dropped the F-bomb.
No, you're fine.
Be that as it may, Huggy. I was there for 7 years. It was a great place to come. It was a sports-loving area. High school wrestling, high school football, high school basketball. And we were close enough to Philadelphia where we covered the Philadelphia Eagles, the Phillies, the 76ers, and so forth. So it was a great job. But I wasn't getting many looks from the bigger markets. That was the idea when you did local sports. It was starting 1984. You were supposed to go from Philadelphia or from Allentown to Lancaster and then maybe end up at some point in Philadelphia. I was a little loose, as I mentioned. I was a party boy back in those days. You know, I played a ton of golf. I don't know that my focus was exactly where it needed to be at that point, but you know, the love for broadcasting was there, and you know, I did a golf show called Let's Go Golfing or Let's Go Pissing and Moaning with Rich Lerner, depending on how I was playing, where I played with various pros in the area, or even I played with Miller Barber, Betsy King, 4 holes, and they would kind of do a playing lesson.
Yeah. So that sounds very similar to what Peter Alice did in Britain on BBC. He played 3 or 4 holes with celebrities and just talked.
Yeah, it was fun. So, and I did a talk show with a lot of the local sports celebrities like Larry Holmes and Mario Andretti. The Lehigh Valley had a rich, history with some really good sports figures. Chuck Bednarik of the Philadelphia Eagles, and a whole bunch of others. So I did that, but I wasn't making headway. I'm getting rejected from Beaumont, Texas, and what have you. And then I'm 30 years old at this point. I'm thinking, the hell am I doing?
Yeah, is this it?
Married, had my wife Robin and I, we had a kid, Jesse, little boy. And I began to think, well, do I really want to bounce around the country from job to job? My parents additionally had a travel business that my mom started. My mom was really probably my dad was a great businessman. My mom may have been as good or better because she, with 4 boys underfoot, she started a travel agency in 1967, became very successful. My mom, Elaine, phenomenal, important figure. And I thought none of the other boys wanted a piece of the business. My parents were getting a little older. Who's going to take over? And I thought, there it is. There's my life. The hell with the sportscasting.
We're going to be a travel agent.
Be a travel agent. 2 years in, I am booking trips to Disney, and I am miserable. I mean, in front of a computer all day, downtown Allentown, and not happy. And I'm 31, 32.
You sound a lot like me working for the Royal Bank of Scotland back in the day. I did.
What'd you do for the Royal Bank?
I was a student before. Yeah.
Okay.
Rob, 2 years in the bank, that was enough. That was the clock watching. It's never a good way to spend your
player,
life.
Weren't you, Huggy?
A long time ago, I was halfway decent. Yeah.
How'd you get into the writing game? Let's detour for a second.
Well, when I was,
how'd you get from Royal Bank?
Well,
then I'll come back.
When I was at Stirling University, my last year, I wrote to about 50 golf-related companies saying, "Here I am. Have you got a job for me?" And Golf World magazine in London came back and said, "Come and talk to us." And I did, and I got the job.
Did they know you could write at this point?
No, they didn't know. I mean, I didn't know.
Did you know you could write?
No. English was always the only thing I was any good at school, I would have to say. But no, they took a punt on me, and it worked out fine. That time, Golf World in London was owned by the New York Times, which also owned Golf Digest. So, in effect, after a couple of years at Golf World in London, I was basically transferred to the States. So.
I didn't know I could write until probably close to 30.
Yeah.
And I used to write long letters by hand back, before
I remember that. Yeah. I can remember typewriters, for goodness sake.
I'm dating myself now. So I'm working at the travel agency 2 years, and I'm really unhappy. I mean, I can sense it's not for me. And credit my mom and dad. They didn't just hand me the keys. They wanted me to learn the business from the bottom up, which is the way you're supposed to do it if you're ultimately going to run a family business, which I think was the plan. But as I recall, I took a phone call one evening from a client who had booked a trip to Disney. I think he booked it, I remember, February of 91. He wasn't leaving until June of 94. And every Tuesday, every week, he called about some aspect of the trip. We had the window or an aisle seat. Are we staying at the Royal Caribbean or are we staying at the Fountain Blue? Whatever. And this particular Tuesday night, he says, Rich, it's John. John, how are you? Good. He says, yeah, we are booked at the 7 o'clock Hoop-de-Doo review. Could you change it to the 8 o'clock showing? I said, John, hold on one moment. I speed dialed my dad. I said, Pop, I don't do the effing Hoop-de-Doo review. I'm
done.
out.
Yeah.
I'm out.
Mm.
And it's a true story. And we laughed. And my parents sort of knew I wasn't real happy. And then I remember telling Robin, my wife has been the most important person in all this for all these years. She knew I was unhappy. I said, look, I don't care where we go. I was with 33. We just bought a house. We just bought the life. Kid, house, the whole bit. I was going to member of a club, 33 years old. I said, I don't care where we go. I want to be a broadcaster and a writer. I need to get good at it because I haven't committed yet to it. So, to me, the lesson was it's not necessarily important where you do it. And I was fixated through my 20s on getting to that big city. Otherwise, you're a failure. Now I thought, if you're a photographer, what does it matter if you're taking pictures in North Dakota or New York? Take pictures. Get good at taking pictures. So I had done a few things while I was working at the travel center that would help me out down the road to scratch the broadcast itch. I was doing a couple of weekly shows for a local radio station, and I made a connection. I actually co-hosted with a famous NBA referee named Earl Yogi Strom, the late Yogi Strom, who was a wonderful guy. And we became friends, and he knew somebody who was starting an all-sports radio station in Dallas, Texas. Yogi made one phone call, and sight unseen, the gentleman who was tasked with launching this new sports network in the early 1990s hired me. So on Earl's recommendation.
So we've got that in common. People took a punt on us.
Earl's recommendation. So that's how I got to Dallas. But additionally, while I was still in Allentown, I started to do a weekly commentary, and it sort of happened out of, well, not quite thin air, but it happened out of snowy air. I pulled up to a red light one night in downtown Allentown, and it was sort of snowing really heavily. And I'm at a red light, and up on the hill, I noticed 4 kids playing football in the snow. They had their coats down as goalposts, and they were just playing. And it reminded me of my childhood. All the games we invented and played in our neighborhood. And I pulled out a pen and pad and started writing. I just came flying out. I wrote a piece, and I thought, well, I don't know what to do with this, but it's kind of, I like it. And I got this idea that it might be good on PBS, public broadcasting. They had sort of, struck me, maybe dabbled in material like this. So I called the PBS affiliate in Philadelphia. I had the program director on the line, didn't know him from Adam. And I said, I have something here. I think it might be right for your programming. And he hemmed and hawed. And then finally he said, you have 90 seconds. Read it to me. And I read him the piece that I wrote. There was dead silence on the other end. And I thought, that was the dumbest thing you've ever done. And then after the pause, he said, that's different. That was essentially the first essay I ever wrote.
Different is always good.
And I was, probably 30 at this point. And that fired me up. So from that point, while I was still working in travel, I had something to think about and write every week. Yeah. And he let me write about whatever I wanted. I could write about the pro teams. If the Eagles were playing the Cowboys, I could write about that, but I didn't have to. I could write about a wiffle ball game in the backyard.
Yeah.
And I did once in a while. And that was important in sort of giving me a foundation and a spark. So I went to Dallas and did this sports talk radio. It actually was just before opinion radio exploded. We were actually, you find this interesting, we used to get heat from our program director if we dabbled in opinion. So if I had a 3-hour shift on this all sports national radio platform, it was largely built around interviews with well-known sports figures. So here's another example of, at every step of the way, you're building. You may not know it. So if I did a 3-hour show and I had Larry Holmes on, heavyweight champion of the world, and I had, say Troy Aikman, and I had Jack Nicklaus on for a 6-minute interview. When my shift was over, I had to then go and prepare a 3-minute feature built around that edited sound from that interview that would air later in the day on the network. What was the value of that? When I got to Golf Channel eventually, we were doing a lot of feature stories, and I knew exactly how to cut them right to the sound. Yeah. And so I
good training, yeah,
really good training. And so I was there 3 years in Dallas, and Golf Channel launched 1995. I got to Dallas in 94, and when I saw Golf Channel, I pointed my finger at the TV and said to my wife, I said, "There, right there." As I'd done the golf show for the local station in Pennsylvania. I grew up at my dad's driving range and knew the game. I played the game, and I knew somebody that I had gone to school with who was hired as a producer there. And late 1996, I was able to get an audition. And I remember I botched they sat me on the desk at Golf Central. I choked my guts out.
As you would, yeah.
Yeah. And I was fortunate. There were some really nice people. Jeff Himes, Mike Whalen, Paul Farnsworth, who saw something in me, and they said, "Hey, just relax, give it another crack." And then I nailed the next one. It was a highlight read. Might have been like a Hailer when highlight read. And it's sort of, I think they could see that I knew the game and had a little enthusiasm. And I came off that set. I did, I think, a Keith Jackson. He was a great cottage football announcer from the 1990s. I might have done a Keith Jackson and maybe a Vin Scully. It's interesting to note. I had him laughing. And then, a month later, I got the offer. And I remember calling my mom, who had has great instincts for all this stuff. And it was not an overwhelming financial offer. I'm not knocking. It just wasn't that much more than what I was making, which wasn't a ton doing radio in Dallas. 1996.
And sometimes you just know if you're in the right place, though. I mean, back to my experience, but just briefly, when I had the interview at Golf World in London, I remember walking out thinking to myself, if I don't get that job, I'm in real trouble.
You knew.
Yeah.
No, but maybe whoever hired you had a notion, had an idea, yeah. But you knew that you could do it. Yeah. You saw yourself doing it.
I wasn't 100% sure I could do it at that point, but that's what I knew I wanted to do.
Or knew what you wanted to do. So I called my mom and I said, "Hey, I got this offer. It's pretty exciting, but not a ton of money. It's just all golf all the time, 24/7. And her response was, if it has, and I've told the story before, if it has Arnold Palmer's name attached to it, you get your ass down there.
Yeah.
That was her advice. You get your ass down there. So we did. We up and took our little baby and we drove from Texas to Florida. And Joe Gibbs was the co-founder with Arnold, was great. I remember being in the early days at a local ice skating rink with our little boy. We ended up having two boys. And Joe's he's the founder, he's the CEO, and I introduced myself, nervous as the CEO. And he knew I was reporting for his company, and he sort of asked, how's it going? And where you living? And I sort of said, yeah, we live in an apartment not far from here. And he says, you going to buy a house? And I said, well, I don't know. I'm not sure what the future holds. I can't be sure. And he looked at me. He was a great old school CEO. He looked at me and he said, go ahead and buy that house. Very, really nice moment. And that was it. The great thing about the Golf Channel in the early years was sort of the green light was kind of always on. I would raise my hand for assignments or raise my hand with an idea, and almost always I said, yeah.
How do you think the Golf Channel's evolved? I mean, you've been there for 25 years now. Well, I mean, it's not the same as it was. It's different. I mean, say it's better or worse or anything. It's just, it's evolved over the years. I mean, how have you viewed that? I mean, you've seen most of it.
Golf Channel was always the little engine that could. And there was a good deal of pride with that, I think it has more polish probably now, a little more gloss and sheen.
Yeah.
Because of its attachment with NBC Sports and Comcast. And it's changed hands a few times. Those of us who are still there, I think we still, in a way, view ourselves as the little engine that could. I don't know if that's necessarily the case. We've been through some hard times. I mean, it was a painful couple of years, the move from Orlando to Stamford, Connecticut. We lost a lot of people that helped to build the place. We're still going.
How would you define its role, the Golf Channel? I mean, a lot of people, I hear people criticize broadcasters, and I mean, I've had to go at times. And are you a mouthpiece for the tour? Are you reporting proper? There's a difference between broadcasting and journalism.
I mean, look, it's a fair question.
All that?
We are partners with the PGA Tour. And if you're business partners with anyone or any entity, you're sensitive to that. You have a partnership. We pay them a lot of money. They pay attention to what we put on the air. They're watching how we message, what we say. Are we advancing some of their initiatives? And whether it's pushing the FedEx Cup or the Players as the fifth major, whatever it may be, we listen and we'll try to be good partners where we can. But we're also cognizant that of that criticism, and we don't want to simply be a mouthpiece. We would lose credibility. And I think if you watch Brandel, now Paul, previously Frank and Justin, they were willing to be critical when it was warranted. And I think that's still the case. I think as far as the audience goes, what I hear from our viewership is we watch you all the time. Like we have, golfers are passionate about the sport because they play it. They don't just watch it, they play it. And that's what differentiates Golf Channel from, say, the NFL Network or MLB or any of the other niche sports channels. And I think there's an argument to be made. I don't know all of the numbers, that we're the most successful niche sport cable television network in history. And I joke. I said the studies show that we are on, the average household, 8 hours a day. They're awake for 1, but we're on for 8. I think Thomas Friedman, the writer for the New York Times, once said we're the last sort of peaceful respite, rest stop on in the television universe.
You've had. I'm going to jump.
Anyway, I don't know if that answers you.
I'm going to.
Let me ask you. Do you? I know you'll be nothing less than honest. Do you think that criticism is warranted? That
sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. I think it's an easy, lazy accusation sometimes, but there are times where,
look, I mean, I could see if I'm if I'm doing a picking event, Colonial, and I trumpet the fact that Scotty Scheffler now has an ironclad grip on the FedEx Cup top spot, and I'm really
milking it,
putting some mustard on that one.
Yeah.
You might go, will you stop, Lerner?
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah.
I get it.
I mean, I want to jump around a little bit now, but you've obviously you must have met every single significant player of the last quarter century. I mean, you're 1997 starting at the Golf Channel. I mean, that's Tiger starting at the same time. I mean, who are the, you don't have to name names, but there's some good guys and there's some bad guys and there's plenty of guys in the middle.
Yeah, some good stories. And you mentioned Tiger. I mean, we absolutely owe Tiger a lot. We came along at the perfect time, right, as he was exploding.
Yeah, I mean, golf had never had the most famous sportsman on the planet before.
Exactly. So Tiger's responsible in part for the growth of the Golf Channel, without a doubt. So I came in 97. I was, fortunate to have met Snead, interviewed Snead a couple of times, remember, under the tree at Augusta National after he hit the ceremonial first tee shot. I innocently asked Sam, how you feeling, Sam? He's in his 80s at this point. And 10 seconds later, after explaining that he had recently had dental surgery, his false teeth were in his hands. That was Snead. Or Snead beginning his story. I was playing with Eisenhower. When a guy begins a story with, I was playing with Eisenhower, he's done something in his life. Right. And I said, Mr. President, you got to get your ass into the shot. And the Secret Service come up and they grab me and they say, you can't say that. That's President of the United States. I said, well, he got an ass, don't he? That was vintage Snead, right?
Absolutely.
You knew him too.
Yeah.
Saracen, I remember covering charity event in Naples the day after Doral. Whatever year Ernie kicked it away on the 72nd hole at the Blue Monster. It might have been 98. And the guys used to go over Alligator Alley from Miami to Naples and play in Ken Venturi's charity event, emceed by the great Jim Nance. And I was covering it. And Els had made double bogey on the 72nd hole 12 hours prior.
I remember that, yeah.
Ernie was one of the luminaries at the Venturi charity event in Naples. Good for Ernie. He kept his commitment. And Ernie was a superstar at this point. Had won 2 U.S. Opens. But there's Saracen on the first tee as Nance is doing the introductions of all the stars. And I'm like, man, that's Gene Saracen. Like, that's a guy who made the Albatross. Not like 1953, no, 1935. And there he is. He's sitting there as if he was in a coffee table book. +4s, the straw hat, the coat and tie, and the cane under an umbrella. But I thought, he's not moving a muscle. Is that a lawn ornament or is that really Gene Saracen?
Yeah.
And he had to be 96, 7 years old at this point. So Nance gets around to introducing Ernie Els, and we're there probably 45 minutes at this point, and I'm eyeballing Saracen back and forth. He still hadn't moved, but I'm intrigued. He's one of the bedrock legends of our sport. Nance introduces Els. Ladies and gentlemen, the great South African Ernie Els. Nice round of applause. Ernie, ever gracious, says, Jim, thank you, and Mr. Venturi. What a privilege it is to be here and an honor to be in the company of such a great man.
Not a bad impression, by the
way. Like Mr. Saracen.
Yeah.
Very nice. Classy. Nance takes the microphone and walks over to where Saracen is sitting. And he leans down. And again, I haven't seen Gene move a muscle. He leans down and he said, Mr. Saracen, how about that? Isn't that nice? And Saracen, with a little bit of a shaky hand, takes the mic and peers up at Ernie Els and says, Ernie Els, first time in my life I seen a man blow a chip shot for $500,000. The man was still hitting shots.
Yeah, yeah.
What is that? 60 odd years after one of the most famous shots in the history of the sport. That I remember distinctly. Byron Nelson, the first time I ever did play-by-play for Golf Channel was at the old Byron Nelson in Dallas, and they brought him up to the booth to call some golf, as he had done for ABC many years before. That was okay, we're not at Dorneyville Golf Center anymore moment for me. So
who's your favorite, though?
Gosh. It's hard to pinpoint a favorite. I've become fond of McIlroy. I really have enjoyed Rory's company.
Yeah.
I've enjoyed watching him grow up. I've enjoyed his honesty, his raw moments. He's not been perfect. He's been petulant at times.
I like that.
A club thrower. Speaking of Doral, I think he hurled one at Doral.
Magnificent throw, that one.
I've just been good to watch a real human being grow up and grow well.
Yeah.
I think he's smoothed out some of the rough edges, and I think he's figured some things out.
And he's got something in common with the Golf Channel. I mean, he's right now been accused more than once of being a mouthpiece for the PGA Tour.
He's partners with our company, and he has business interests. And I mean, it's fair to say that Rory's not simply doing this out of the goodness of his heart to help the PGA Tour. He has a financial stake in all of it. But I think, all things being equal, I think Rory does believe he's on the right side of this one.
Yeah. Where are you on all this? I mean, let's say we always have to inevitably, I'm sorry at this point, to inject live golf into the conversation, but there's a lot of people out there interested in what you think. Where are we headed with it, for one thing?
It fractured the sport. I don't think anybody could sit here and say this has been really good for golf. Although it's been very good financially for all the players. It's driven up.
And it's maybe made the PGA Tour do some things that they should have done before.
It's driven up purses. I think, though, it is fair to point out that the increase in the money on the PGA Tour was going to happen before Live. And I know that for a fact. I was at Torrey Pines 3 years ago, was it? They came out of meetings. The tour had a meeting with the agents, and one prominent agent shared with me right after the meeting that by 2025, based on the new TV deal that had just been signed, the leading money winners on the PGA Tour were going to be making what he termed NBA money. They were going to be making north of $40 million a year based on the new media money that was going to be coming in. Nothing to do at that point with the Saudis. I think the Saudis forced the tour to act much quicker than it wanted to, but probably, they had to. And the tours, I think it's fair to say, has never been nimble, particularly nimble. They didn't have to be. And so maybe from that standpoint, Mickelson may have been right about some things. I don't like the way he went about it. I mean, he's a whole other subject. And I think his legacy's going to be complicated. And I don't think we know all there is to know at this point. There's more, I think, that probably will be coming out. There's a book we're hearing about on the horizon from Armin Catane and Billy Walters, so we'll see. But I maintained, had Mickelson walked away after Kiowa, winning the PGA Championship, never hit another shot the rest of his days, I'm no business person, but I'm guessing he would have earned $20 to $30 million a year conservatively. He would have had, probably the preeminent broadcast seat in the game.
You think he would have been sitting next to Jim Nantz?
I think that was widely assumed.
He would have been terrific at that as well.
He would have been great at it. Everybody was excited for that. He popped in the booth at Harding Park, the PGA Championship. He had a burgeoning, media business. He was going to sort of be in the Peyton Manning style, Steph Curry style media content business. He's been doing the matches. Phil would have had the Arnold Palmer ambassadorship for the rest of his days, and made 20 to 30, maybe more, $1 million a year without swinging a golf club for as long as he wanted it. 20 more years probably if he played his cards right. So if you do the math there, 20 million a year for 20 years, there's 400 mil. You draw the conclusions that you
have to conclude
want.
that he needed the money quicker than that.
So I think Mickelson is probably the most fascinating, and depending on your view, if you're a tour loyalist, potentially tragic figure in all this, but I'll concede he views it differently. He thinks he's on the right side of it. He thinks the tour is staid and stuck in its ways. And
I tell you, I've got some sympathy for that point of view. I mean, and the changes that are coming along, you have to conclude that there was some truth in what Phil was saying.
Phil wanted the stars to be better compensated. And I think that's what it comes down to. And I don't think Phil was entirely interested in bankrolling developmental tours or senior golf.
Yeah, I wouldn't quite give him that much credit.
Player allocation for all of the tours under the PGA Tour umbrella is north of 50%. It's in line with other professional sports leagues. However, it's not 55% to the PGA Tour players. Out of that 55 come the purses for the Korn Ferry Tour, PGA Tour Latino America, PGA Tour champions, and so forth. And you could argue that the winners should get more than 18% of the purse. Bottom line, Phil always believed that the superstars who drove the ratings, drove media interest, fan engagement, were not being compensated in the way that he thought they should. Now, there's a story that's going around about Arnold Palmer in the 1990s at a meeting with Greg Norman, where Norman presented his idea for the World Tour. And a minute in, Arnold stood up and said, "I'm out. It'll be good for you and me and Jack." And he turned around to the rank and file. He said, "But it won't be great for these guys." The idea being, if you buy this sort of romantic notion that Arnold, as the superstar, understood his role.
But you could also argue as well, though, that competitive sport is not a democracy. It's the ultimate meritocracy and should be treated as such. And if you're not good enough, find someone else to do or play better. It sounds harsh, but I've got some sympathy for that point of view in competitive sport. And I speak as somebody who leans left pretty much politically, but competitive sport is completely different from that.
Phil made some reasonable points. And I think understandable that he would probably sit back now and say, they can thank me. Those who will now reap the benefits from these elevated events on the PGA Tour have me to thank. I think that's a little much on Phil's part. Again, I think a lot of this was coming. It was accelerated, though, because of the threat of Live Golf.
Yeah. I mean, I do think, I feel a little bit sorry for him, more than a little bit, with this Alan Shipnuck conversation thing. I mean, you can probably argue that Phil was going to get himself into trouble at some point without Alan's help. But, I've said this to people before. I think that there's three things I believe about that conversation that those two had. I believe that when Alan says that Phil didn't say out loud, "This is off the record," I believe that. I also believe, the second thing I believe is that Phil obviously thought it was off the record, because he wouldn't have said the things that he said for public consumption. That made no sense. And the third thing, I can't prove any of this, obviously, but I also believe that Alan must have known that Phil thought it was off the record. I'm journalistically, I'm right. Conflicted by that, because I don't think I would have done what Alan did.
Do you think Phil did say the Saudis are scary?
Absolutely. I don't doubt that he said.
But I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah. I mean,
I mean,
is that
if I'd listened to
is
Phil,
that morally bankrupt?
if Phil Mickelson had said that to me, and I would have thought, wow, he obviously thinks this is off the record, because it makes no sense for him to have said that.
Yeah.
That's how I'd look at that.
So look, you asked me where I stand on it, and I don't know if this is the minority view, and on moral grounds, I'm not a fan.
No, I mean, how
of the Saudi
could anybody
enterprise.
be?
But I want to be clear.
Yeah.
The Graham McDowells and the Henrik Stensons of the world, they may see it differently. They may be at points in their lives where this made financial sense for their families. I concede all of that. I concede that the global economy is complex. You can poke holes in every argument right now. You cannot puff out your moral chest because for reasons you, I think, understand, right? There's always a counter to it. Geopolitics are complicated. Saudi Arabia is an ally, but so too was Stalin. And again, we don't have time to dive into the complexities of all of this. Me personally, I have a hard time with what they've done, with how they treat women, what they did to the journalist for the Washington Post.
That's unarguable,
right? And but I say that, and I know that buildings that I walk into in my daily life are probably Saudi built or Saudi investment in them. Businesses that I'm involved with probably have Saudi investment. The car that I drive. You keep going.
Yeah, Eamon Lynch's counter to that though is that they're not. We're not employees of the Saudi.
I get it.
And Eamon, I love Eamon to death. I think he's a fantastic journalist and a writer, and I agree with him 100% on the pounding on the Saudi stuff. But there has to be golf stories beyond that, given the fact that it does exist. And, doing what we do for a living, we have to write and talk about it.
Yeah,
we can't just keep pounding on them it doesn't, the Saudi.
The question,
that argument is one.
The question to ponder is, do the powers that be in our sport, we know who they are, do they want to share the round table with Mohammed bin Salman?
I don't. I mean, it's so distasteful. Some of it,
and if you invite them in, you're going to get blowback.
Do you think that Monahan should have sat down and at least listened at the very beginning when this whole thing came up? I mean, I would argue certainly that he had an obligation to at least take the meeting. And by all means say, we're not going anywhere near that, but fine.
Why did he have to?
Well, I think because he works for the PGA Tour, and that might have been to the benefit of the PGA Tour.
What would have been the benefit to take the meeting?
Well, he didn't know. That's why you take the meeting, you find out.
If it was Jeff Bezos of Amazon and not Mohammed bin Salman, maybe you take the meeting. I think from the start, the issue has been the
problem was Greg Norman.
the Saudi human rights record.
Plus, Greg Norman's relationship with the PGA Tour didn't help. I mean, he was, to my mind, exactly the wrong guy to be fronting this whole thing. It was blown out of the water before it even started.
30-year saga, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Greg, does not come out of this too well in my mind.
It's really messy. I mean, you're talking about two all-time figures who are now wearing the black cape as far as the PGA Tour is concerned. Other people may feel differently. I get that. Norman and Phil Mickelson, fractured relationships everywhere, splintered European Ryder Cup effort.
Well, they've come out of this pretty much unscathed so far, the Ryder Cup team.
Yes.
They've lost, Sergio maybe had one more, and maybe Casey had one more, and that's it.
You were going to have a Poulter captaincy. Westwood was going to be a captain. Garcia was going to be a captain. Stenson was the captain, and then he wasn't.
Probably.
Yeah, and all of that vanishes now. And it leaves a sour taste.
Yeah, I mean, I get all that, but the team for the next match,
I think on paper the
European team is going to be really good. Yeah, and America, because of the size and the numbers, can absorb the loss of
Koepka and DeChambeau and those guys.
There's something else that McIlroy can save. In addition to the PGA Tour, he can save the Ryder Cup.
Well, which is hugely important for the European Tour, DP World Tour. I mean, that funds everything. Yeah. So.
It's a lot on his shoulders, and he seems willing to take it on. So back to Live Golf. They're a threat.
I'm not that interested.
Joe Ogilvy said to me, who's a smart guy, Duke guy, played the tour. He said, $3 billion's hard to kill. Johnny Harris, I'll just quote some noteworthy people in the game. Johnny Harris, Wells Fargo, and Quail Hollow, the mover and shaker. He was great friends with Arnold Palmer. Johnny Harris on our set the week of the President's Cup, when asked if he felt Liv was a real serious threat. If it's just about the money, he said, yes, it's a threat. But if it's about some of the other things that we all feel matter in the game, then no, I don't think it's as big a threat as people think. You know what? Somebody shared this with me. Hogan years ago was presented with an opportunity to play in some sort of an exhibition, a money match kind of a thing. And he matter of factly said, well, what do you win if you win? And wasn't talking about the money. It just doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the issue I think Liv has right now. Is all they do have is money. Like, I don't think people are interested in the rock and roll and the sideshow stuff. Nobody that I know is saying, wow, I love the whole, rock and roll thing and the fact that they're wearing shorts. Now, maybe another generation will feel differently. I just don't see it. It just doesn't seem to matter. And
I tell you what's interested me is it's revealed some of the top players, Dustin Johnson being the classic example of somebody who is a brilliant golfer, but didn't love it. He didn't have any great love for it. It was a way of making money for him. It was a job. And that's fair. And there's nothing wrong with that. But it has revealed that side of things for some of those guys.
Another one. A friend of mine knows Koepka. And when Koepka announced that he was going to live, I called my friend. And I know Brooks, and I had done a long story on him when he was just laying waste to the major fields. And he had, sort of carved out this kind of reputation as just the most cold-blooded competitor.
Yeah.
The only thing he gave a crap about was winning and winning big ones. And that was appealing. And now Brooks goes and takes the money. And I said to my friend, I said, damn. I said, what happened to Brooks? I mean, really? He's just going to go and take this? And he said, Koepka sold his business. He sold his business. He built it, and then he sold it. He'll come in periodically to check on it. They'll keep him on. But he got out.
He's a consultant now.
He got out and sold his business. And I agree with Tiger here. I just don't see where you find the motivation on a 94-degree day to go and pour sweat and dig it out when they've already paid you 100 or 150 or 200 million or whatever it is. Good for you if that's, you got the cheese. I'm with Tiger on that one. So
it's the last few minutes of this, Rich. I feel like we've kind of gone down a negative plug hole a little bit the last few minutes, but let's finish on a more positive note and look back at your career at the Golf Channel. What would be the highlights for you?
I think that being a part of a show and live from that, I think has served the game well. I was about to say that a show that has mattered. That's a little full of myself.
Well, I think it's a crying shame that you're not on in the UK anymore. Yeah. We used to get Golf Central, which I used to like listening, the news roundup kind of thing. And we don't get that anymore.
I think for the most part, live from, which we do at the majors, has been true to the game. We don't junk it up. And I'm proudest, I think, of that. And then, the stories and the essays that I've been lucky to do, that they've green-lighted me to do all these years. You know what it's like writing on deadline. It's, somewhat unusual, I think, for TV. But, on on those Sundays of, a Masters or a Ryder Cup or an Open, whatever it is, I'm sweating bullets. And I've many days I've done 3 or 4 pieces because the story's changed. I'll send back to our headquarters. I'll send back several scripts, alternate endings.
Right.
And it's
I've done that.
It's a tremendous challenge, and it keeps me fully engaged all day long. So that's the thrill of it, is to chase that. That, Huggy. You don't really have a net there, and try to get it right, and then go host the show. So live from's been great. A good variety to a chance to do things like the Asia Pacific Amateur, which we're in Thailand right now recording the show. Good variety, Asia Pacific Am, the Latin America Am. I did the U.S. Amateur this year, men and women college event. I like, moving outside of the PGA Tour because golf's bigger than just
when I was doing a daily newspaper job for a couple of years when I came back from America to Scotland, and there was a choice between the tour event or something else. I always went with something else because there's always another tour event next week. I like the variety that you just described.
Yeah, I mean, there are 100 good stories out here. So I would say live from, and I've had the chance to do some good feature stories through the year.
What is your role in that? To me, you kind of get wasted, if you can put it that way. You sit there and you're the guy that makes the trains run on time, and you ask a lot of questions, but I don't get to hear from you enough.
Well, I get my say if you watch each night. So starting with, I write the teases every night, so I have a chance to say something, oftentimes in a more subtle manner, nuanced fashion.
You're not bludgeoning like Brando.
I write the tease, every night, starting on Monday night of a major championship week. And then on Wednesday night, I do the closing essay. So I try to set the tone for what it is. What's the story on the eve of whatever the major is? Get a chance to say something there. And then each night thereafter, typically top of the second hour, I write an essay / tease, and I'll try to capture the day, whatever we've seen. If it's a weather story, or if it's a low score, if it's a Tiger story, whatever it is. And then Sunday, I write the closing piece, and that's essentially would be like the column. I've got to get that right, and it can't just be numbers and stats. That's not what that's about. It's try to capture the essence. So my contribution in terms of what I saw it comes in I would say a more nuanced way, which I think is probably the role. I think I'm actually fortunate as the host that they allow me to do this, to write those pieces. And
because it would be easy to just pigeonhole you as the guy asking the questions.
That's typically the job. And those pieces are vetted, it goes through.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I've had a couple that have been killed because they maybe went a little too far. But I'm fortunate. I mean, my best buddy there is Matt Hegarty. He's in charge of live froms, and Matt has just has a great ear and a good feel for it, and understands, me, and he knows how much I dig and grind on these things.
How inclined are you to disagree with what's being said on that kind of show?
I'm inclined now and then, and I'll push back if I feel that that Brandel has said something or Paul has said something that needs to be checked, or that warrants another viewpoint, I'll freely jump in, and I'm mindful of the audience. I try to put myself in their seat, and in the seat of someone with an opposing view, right? So I have to delicately be able to, make my point clear. If Brandel has said something, and I will say, look, Brandel's brilliant.
You're kind of the spokesman for the viewer then in that situation.
I have to be. Yeah. And I remember there was a time where, Koepka maybe had won the PGA, hit that 4-iron at the par 3 at Belle Reve late, made it 2, held off Tiger, who had posted 66th. And I guess it might have been at the Masters the following April. Brandel, I don't remember the exact context, questioned Koepka. And I felt I had to push back. Like, what more does he need to show you? And it's all good nature.
Yeah.
And Brandel appreciates it. Brandel understands television. As much as he understands golf, he gets TV and, what makes for good TV. You have to move the meter in TV. If the meter never spikes, that's not very good. But he's been great to work with. McGinley's been a phenomenal addition.
Yeah, Paul's been on this podcast.
Yeah.
I'd love to get Brandel on, but
I don't know. I have to get to the bottom of it.
I'm one of the thousands of people that he's blocked on Twitter, so that might never happen.
And look, I'm working this week with Frank, and Frank's legend in our building.
Frank's been on here too.
He's legend in our building, and he built he was part of that team that built Live From, and that helped, I think, to solidify Golf Channel's reputation. If we have a reputation, if there was authenticity, if there, was goodwill, it's in part because of people like Frank. You know immediately when you listen to Frank, he knows the game, he cares about the game. So we've had good people, and look, for me, it's to bring it back full circle. I mean, the risk of sounding cliche, this was way more than I could have imagined when I was driving that tractor at my dad's driving range.
Balls are zinging.
Who could have imagined there would be a golf network, dedicated to the sport that I grew up in, and to have this is what coming to the end of year 26. In this business, it's fickle and can be a little volatile. So, fortunate to have had a life in the game, and met some incredible people. I never did answer who no, I did. Rory was the favorite, I think. I picked that out of thin air. I'm sure if I thought more about it, I'd come up with a couple of others. I get asked that. You get asked that a lot. Who's your favorite? And who's the biggest? You know what?
And you get, I was going to say, I get asked that too. What do you think of so and so? And
I tell people it's important to know that so and so's a good guy.
Yeah. It used to be Sevi was the one that I get asked the most. What was Sevi like?
But you know what, John? You and I talked about this the other day. When you're in it as long as we are, you realize how fallible and human our heroes are.
Oh,
that's really
never meet your heroes. There's some truth.
That's really maybe I think one of the enduring lessons of the 25 years I've done this is just. I used to tell my kids that when they would ask me, "Hey, Dad, what's so and so like?" and I would say, "Son, here's what I can tell you about so and so. They're really good at golf, exceptional at a hard game. Beyond that." And not a lot I can tell you with certainty. I can tell you professionally, they seem very nice.
Well, that's the thing. You and I probably think the same on this. I've made friends with professional golfers, but it's just happened. I've never set out to be anybody's friend. I'd like them to respect what I do, and but that's as far as going. And you have a professional relationship with somebody like Rory. You don't have a friendship. It can be friendly.
But it's not a true friendship. It's just that it's a good professional relationship. That's the best. That's as much as you can hope for with most of them.
What's Tiger like? And I would say, well, I don't go to Vegas with him, or I haven't gone out to dinner with him. I know him professionally, and I got one or two funny stories in his company, but humans, as you and I are, flawed, more deeply in some cases than others. But we're there to cover the golf, and I still marvel at what they do. And I think
they're amazingly good. You mentioned
I think
unbelievably good. At golf.
That still boggles my mind. Like, this game is so damn hard, and they're so good at it. And I tell people, look, this is their job. They work at this. That little 20-yard shot, they're hitting it over. They're hitting it thousands and thousands of times.
And we've, if you're like me, I mentioned Seve there a minute ago, and he was always my favourite after Lee Trevino. There's still 1A and one, the two of them. But I was lucky enough to write some of Seve's stuff for him and see him up close and go to Spain and talk to him. And he, people said, you said to me earlier on, you were halfway decent at golf back in. I said, well, yeah, I mean, I played off slightly better than scratch, but Seve was a genius. I mean, he could do things that, I mean, I just stood there and watched and couldn't believe what he could do.
I remember, odd guy to bring up now, given his troubles. Wish him well. Cabrera. Sitting with Cabrera at a cafe in Buenos Aires, doing a profile. And he'd won the Masters and the U.S. Open at this point. So I said, well, who taught you how to play Augusta National? It's typically somebody has mentored you, right? You go around with Crenshaw. If you don't know the course, you need to learn the subtle nuances, right? That's part of the romance of Augusta.
Yeah.
And Cabrera says, Seve. And I go, follow up. So what did he tell you? And gave me chills. Cabrera raises his hands and starts to wiggle his fingers. And then he points at his left hand. He says, Seve say is in the fingers. Augusta is in the fingers. And I thought, wow. Okay.
Well,
it gave me chills. Like,
if ever there was a course made for Seve, of course it was that one.
I once did a piece on that greatness lies in the fractions that exist in the subtle movements of golfers. So like Faldo's 2-iron to 13 in 96, just a subtle shuffle of the feet to get comfortable. And I did a whole...
normal human beings in that situation that you just mentioned, he went back and forth between clubs. And
right.
You hit it in the water after all that, but not him.
No. So what about professional golf, and I've shared this, I think what still fires me up is that you're covering and you're around, you're sort of drafting off of, as a reporter, excellence every single day. Like it requires nothing less. Right? You have to be excellent to shoot 66 on a Thursday, on a Saturday, at Colonial, at Augusta. Name the place. And that environment is charged. When you have 120, 156, whatever, the max would be 156. And that's what they're trying to do every single day, because you to earn, you got to be excellent out there. You can't be pretty good. But you got to be excellent.
No, that's my point.
Is absolutely... People think you're full of crap when you say this, but it's true. Like, that environment is charged.
And that might, to get the earlier point, I mean, the difference between the scratch golfer that I was and the tour player, I mean, it's the difference between those two is bigger than the difference between the guy the level I played at and the 10 handicapper. That's a smaller gap than between the scratch player and the tour player. I mean, people don't realize just how good these guys are. It's ridiculous.
It's a head scratcher. And I always tell people, I said, look, I know if you're going to go watch a tournament, you're probably going to want to see a guy hit at 330. That's cool. To see McIlroy stick the finish on a, full-blooded tee shot is, it's vivid. But go watch him hit shots from 80 to 120 Watch him flight it. Watch him zip it. Watch him hit a little 2-check skipper.
Trevino was the genius
it
at all that.
It's ball control. That, to me, it freaks me out sometimes. Like I love that. You know, you listen to a player and a caddy, like a player go 120, 124, and the caddy go, it's 126. And you're like, wait a minute, that's 2 yards. They know, they feel in the fingers. They know the 2 yards. They got it. And that, like, that's insane.
Yeah, I know.
Right?
Yeah. I've used this cliche a million times now, but at its best, golf is an art. It's not a science.
Really?
Never a science.
Although it's really got scientific.
Well, far too much for me. Yeah. That's why I loved Seve. I loved Trevino. I love the Shane Lowry. I love watching Shane Lowry play golf.
Sugar Shane, man.
Beautiful golfer.
Love that swing.
That's proper golf for me. It's not this robotic, I don't get that.
His swing is sort of perfect for his build. He's got kind of what I would call a longshoreman's frame, but he's graceful as could be. It's so pretty.
And
he rocks back a little bit. It's got a little bit of a Jimmy Ballard. Do you remember? You've
got to do me a favor. Get this on the Golf Channel. Film the chipping contests that Lowry and Harrington have early in the week at tournaments on the practice range. Get that on film because it's fantastic.
Have you had Harrington on your show?
Yes,
that had to go 3 hours.
He, I believe, is still the most downloaded version of these podcasts. He's still number one on here. Harrington, he was brilliant. Yeah,
he's great.
Yeah, and I had to brought it to a halt because he goes on forever if you give him the chance.
Speaking of that, at the charity event that I mentioned earlier, we had it a couple of years ago at Top Golf in Orlando, and Padraig was playing the father-son, or the PNC Challenge now, in Orlando, and he came as our kind of, along with Peter Jacobson, sort of our featured guest on the Sunday night where we did the live auction, and we had it at Top Golf. He was just so good. We had 100 people, whatever it was, and he's just giving lessons to anybody.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
And everybody.
He's
it didn't matter. They were 22 handicap or 2, and he's just freely giving this advice.
Yeah.
And he was the last one there. And finally, I had to say, Padraig, you can go now. His love for the game.
Yeah. He's the one hero everybody should meet.
That's you asked me among my favorites. Harrington would definitely be among my favorites.
Mine too.
And McGinley, by the way, is another one of my all-time favorites. But Harrington has such a genuine love for the game and real joy in sharing what he knows. I've been in.
Mind you, he's perverse as well. It just makes me laugh. It doesn't matter what you say to him; he disagrees with it just to see if you can back up what you're saying. Yeah,
I've been in his.
He's hilarious.
I've been in the padded room in his house outside of Dublin. I've been in the backyard where he hits 5 irons around the telephone pole. I love all of his stories. You ask Padraig, "What's the greatest shot of your life?" He will not say the 5-wood, the 71st hole at Birkdale. He will not say that, though that would be the one that comes to mind right away. He will tell you it is the 5th shot, the wedge to the 72nd hole at Carnoustie, after he thought he had blown it. And his caddy, to his everlasting credit, told Padraig as they walked up to that 5th shot, "Get your head out of your rear end now." And Padraig got it up and down for double.
That's right. He told that story on here.
Yeah, still thought he had blown it. But then Sergio came unglued a little bit, got maybe a little bit unlucky with the putt. And Padraig ended up winning that Open at Carnoustie. And McGinley, I will tell people, and they look at me quizzically, I think he's one of the greatest success stories in the history of golf. And people will say, well, how would you say that about a guy who won 4 tournaments on the DP World Tour, the European Tour? I said, well, because the short answer is when he was 19, he was a 4 handicap playing Gaelic football in Dublin. And roughly 25 years later, he was the winning Ryder Cup captain.
Yeah. Paul's been on here as well. I mean, I'm a big fan of Paul. He's a lot to commend him to the world.
Paul, I did a long profile of Paul before the Ryder Cup in 2014. I remember a line from that in the run-up to that Ryder Cup. He was opposite Tom Watson. I said, the United States has the legend. Europe has the leader. I spent a whole day with Paul and his former college teammates at US International in San Diego. And I could see what a uniter he was. And then I sat with him and I picked his brain on strategy, and I knew how smart he was.
He changed the way that captaincy was done.
Yeah,
he did.
He's a great, the phrase I know that you use in Europe, he's a great man manager. Mm-hmm. He has some really good stories. I don't know if he shared them with you, but handling Dubuisson was, mercurial.
He had McDowell playing with him for months on end.
He kept McDowell, he played McDowell once the first 2 days. McDowell was upset, like all good players. He thought he could handle more, but McGinley had something else in mind. He was going to send him out first in Sunday singles, and he did. And when they got to that first tee, I don't know if he shared the story with you, and the crowd, the first tee of a Ryder Cup in Europe, there's nothing like that atmosphere. And again, McDowell, somewhat disappointed through the week at having been, benched for one session each day. McDowell came up to McGinley and said, I get it. Thank you for the honor. He knew that was a spot that required emotional endurance, and I think he was 3 down to Spieth and ended up getting the full point.
Yeah.
And the other part of that story is Dubuisson went out last, and McGinley, once all the matches had gone off, McGinley went out to follow Dubuisson. And the second hole, I have this correct, Paul can back it up, Dubuisson called his captain over and said, I'm lonely. It's an odd thing to say, but it was sort of, it fit Dubuisson, who was sort of hard to reach.
He's an odd character, yeah.
Wrong side of the tracks. And how Paul got the most out of Dubuisson is for another podcast when the Ryder Cup comes around with Paul. And Paul tells Victor, I need your head in the game. These first 7 holes are pivotal. And I promise you that there will be people out here. They're just with those early matches. They're going to come to you.
Yeah.
Sure enough, later, when McDowell closed out Spieth, who was the golden boy, or was just it was ascending to golden boy status in 2014. Paul sent Des Smith out to McDowell, and Des told, per Paul's instructions, Des told McDowell after he won, I need you with Dubuisson for support. So if you go, according to Paul, if you go look at the celebration when Donaldson scored the winning point, you won't see McDowell. Why? McDowell, at the request of his captain, McDowell was with Dubuisson. That's man management. And Paul is that kind of, Paul's a uniter. He's cagey, but he's a uniter. He showed up to the President's Cup live from, and he had Cadbury chocolates for everybody on the crew. Like he gets it.
Yeah. And mind you, he's not above admitting to a mistake at Gleneagles. The Stephen Gallagher, Ian Poulter combination on the first day. Disaster, right. And Paul said that he got it wrong and told me why he got it wrong. And he's not above admitting, that, because in the Ryder Cup, it's ridiculous to think it's all going to work. I mean, you can put the best pairing you can think of together and it makes perfect sense, and they go out and the other guy holds one more putt and they lose, So
one of the greatest success stories in the history of golf, I think. McGinley, given where he was working a desk job in Brussels when he was 19 after he had wrecked his knee playing Gaelic football. And then he started to get into golf, and the rest is history. So, anyway, Huggy, we can
Rich,
go.
I promised we would finish on a positive, and I think that is a positive. Thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thanks, Huggy.
I'm not sure about you, but I'll be honest, I never would have expected most of what we heard in that interview, and I've come away with a newfound respect for Rich Lerner. Well, that's our last episode for 2022, but we will be back after the Christmas break with new fortnightly episodes, starting with one that I was especially pleased to have been lucky enough to secure.
He was never a ranter or a raver, and he was a very humble person, really. He never talked about himself. Or one day I said to him, you know, you're so laid back, I really don't think you're very competitive at all. And he said, you're joking. I would be the most competitive person you've ever met. And I said, well, you never show it, really. And he didn't show it at home either. He was just dad and, my husband, dad to the children, and that was that.
That's a sit-down chat with Mary Thompson, wife of Mr. Five Times Peter, next time on The Thing About Golf.